Good evening and welcome to Poems On. This is the 12th show of the second season, and our theme tonight is humor. Our returning guest is the fabulous Melissa Balmain, and our new guest is the equally fabulous Chris O'Carroll. So, welcome to you two. I think we're going to have a lot of fun because it's permitted with this theme.
Phew.
Thank you. So Chris is going to read first. Would you take it away, sir?
It would be my pleasure. Let's start at the end, so to speak. This is Ode to Old Age. I walk into a room and suddenly I'm at a loss. What did I want in here? That puckish brain tweaker, reality, has learned to shift its shape or disappear. I used to have to smoke expensive weed to tune into this zoned out paradigm. Today, my skull packs all the buzz I need. I'm high on failing cells and passing time. Each friend or relative that I outlive is one less witness to my foolish youth. Now, any version of the past I give is more or less the undisputed truth. What names and numbers I may have forgotten are obligations I've been glad to shed. Untangled from the past I once was caught in, I rest in peace before I'm even dead.
Thank you.
I love that poem, Chris. It's just
like 3 of the 5 poems I'm going to read today. That one was originally published in Life, which goes to show you what a fabulous editor Melissa Balmain is.
What fabulous taste I have. Yeah. No, I love that rueful upside sort of use of comic poetry. You do it so well.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, the it's often been said that comedy and tragedy, you know, are alternate sides of the same coin, and in fact, your handling of the tone here keeps it firmly on the humorous side of the line. But if you're listening to what you're actually saying, a lot of the details in other circumstances are things we cite ruefully and really unhappily. For example, when each of our peers dies, there's one less person that actually knew us in childhood. And you find a way to soften the blow of that when much of the time, whenever I think about those developments, I'm thinking there are fewer and fewer people who really understand me or know who I am. Mm-hmm. So it just goes to show that you can use humor to deal with any human situation. And there's a lot to be said. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for it. Just as an aside, I was pretty sure that you two already knew each other, but
yeah, we go back at least to, I believe, a reading in Newburyport. I think that's where I first met you, Chris.
I first met you when you were the featured reader at a Powwow River Poets event.
Great.
Yeah, that was a good time.
And a fan ever since.
Seemed like an inevitability. So
this poem is one that I couldn't have written until after I wrote a more serious poem about the same thing, about the same subject matter. I had, being irreverent and funny about my own mortality is second nature to me. But being funny about dementia was more fraught because my mother, who lived to be 86, was living with dementia from her late 70s onward. And that was, was a huge issue for the whole family. And until I found a way into the poem I knew I had to write about loving somebody who is in a big way no longer her whole self. Once I had written that poem, suddenly I was free to write about the same material from a more cheerful perspective. So the comedy had to wait on the tragedy in this case.
Do you think that was you think it was a matter of kind of giving yourself a form of permission?
It could be. Sometimes you have a poem that you have to write, partly just because you have to write it, but partly because it's sort of sitting on top of everything that you are going to be able to write after it. So yes, once I had actually been serious about how I felt about my mother and what she was going through at the end of her life. Her favorite term for what she was going through was losing my marbles, which will give you some idea of where I got my instinct to be funny about serious things from.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised you come from a long line of people with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for that.
It's a necessity. It's the last refuge in some situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, would you like to, since you said you chose something as a response?
Yeah. Like, fortunately for me, humor, pretty big category, and Chris picks 5 poems first, and so I had the advantage of being able to look at Chris's poems and think, well, what poems do I have that might respond in some way to his, maybe not directly, but in some sense. So the first poem that I picked has to do with perhaps a different consequence of aging. So I'll just read it. It's called Fallen. As a kid growing up in New York, I considered our fall second rate. How I longed for the grand mythological land we exotically labeled upstate. In that Eden, I'd heard, leaves turned bright, endless acres of yellows and reds, while my single tree browned, dropping one tiny mound that I kicked to the curb with my keds. Now I live several hours to the north, and the maples and oaks truly blaze, hues so loud they look fake, till the time comes to rake, without stopping for numberless days. And I daydream of trips further south, of the places I'll shop, stroll, and dine, in that part of the map where the leaves may be crap, but you don't need a rod in your spine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So
I love the line, kicked to the curb with my kids. First of all, it's got the nice alliteration. And second of all, there's something about a brand name that sort of really situates the scene in time and place.
Yeah, I want to build on that a little bit too, because it isn't just that it's alliteration, but there are, I'm sure you've heard comedians say that there are certain consonant sounds that are funny, and the K sounds are those are funny.
So which is why, like, chicken is funnier than poultry. Yeah, although poultry can be hilarious as well.
Yeah. Well, so that's one thing. The use of the use of sounds that we associate with humor. Another thing that you've done here is you've used a metric structure that I basically identify with Dorothy Parker, or using anapaests, because it's a tripping meter. It's by the dactyls and anapaests, for me, by nature, are tripping meters, and therefore they really lend themselves to humor. I don't know if when you sit down to write, do you choose the meter, or how is it that you begin in that regard?
I don't necessarily sit down and think I'm going to write something anapestic. But as I start to, think about the topic and think about words that are jumping out to me as potential rhymes, potential lines, sometimes I'll start with a line. I think about what meter that falls into, and yes, often anapestic or dactylic meter, da 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 da, or da 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 da, will turn out to be the meter of the poem, because as you pointed out, those really lend themselves to humor. You don't read a lot of somber poetry in anapaests. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's rare. I sometimes I feel that the darker the material, occasionally the better it works with this kind of meter, because they're pushing against each other in an interesting way.
Interesting.
I don't consider this a super dark poem, although it gets it aging, you know, spinal damage, you know, a little dark, but not like horrible. You know, not as dark as dementia.
Yeah.
But you know.
Have you ever tried to write funny with spondies?
I am one of those people, and don't hate me, who don't quite believe in spondies. I had the great fortune early on to study, to take a workshop or two with the poet Timothy Steele,
Sure.
who is, as both of you know, a brilliant prosodist, and he tends to rank syllables with, you know, like syllables within a structure. So, you know, it's one thing how words sound in the wild, but once they're in captivity in a poem, the syllables around them will tend to promote or demote the syllables between them. And so I find that even though something may sound spondaic in the wild, by the time it's in one of my poems, one syllable is going to sound stronger than the other.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But that said, people have written brilliantly with deliberate spondies. I will point to Marilyn L. Taylor, who has a poem in defense of the spondee, which I believe we published in Light. It's hilarious. I encourage you to look at it.
Yeah, I've had Marilyn on the show. I'm really glad that we're having some shop talk here, because we already know that the poems are going to inject humor into the conversation. But the whole idea of the technical modes of address in humorous stuff is something that I'm going to get up to a little bit later among the things that I'm going to read. And I would also say that for me, the difference between humor in general and comedy in slightly more particular is that for me, there's always a performance aspect to comedy. So in other words, the humorist that I first fell in love with as a kid was Robert Benchley. Mm-hmm. And so I was reading prose, and it wasn't burst out loud, lose your chocolate milk funny, but I loved to soak in the way that he said things. And so that for me was humor. But then I learned about comedy really from the theater and from television and from talking and listening. And so I make that distinction that if I'm writing something that's meant to be comic, you really need to hear it as opposed to just read it on the page. And for me, that's a pretty good segue for the poem I'm going to start with, because it's an unusual examination in a way of the technical aspects of what's funny, or it tries to be. And it's called Patching a Flat, which is, it's based on a joke that a very old and dear friend of mine told me at easily 50 years ago that was really very flat. It wasn't a very funny joke. But we were friends, and, you know, these things do happen between friends, and you forgive each other. But we were also a little bit like Cramden and Norton, so we were always trying to one up each other, and that's where this came from. But this was a literal exchange that we had. Now, I'm not going to apologize in advance for the fact that this joke is not only not particularly funny, but, you know, it's also uses a stereotype which would not be used today, I hope. But bear with me. You'll note that in the poem, the narrator also points out the problems with the initial joke. Patching a Flat, and it's for Everett Sprague, who was my dear friend. We had a lot of laughs together, Ev and I. Our friendship thrived because we found the same things funny, almost all the time. Okay, he said one day, I got a joke. This Japanese guy goes to see his doctor. He says, I don't see so good. You make this fast. I double park my car. The doctor looks him over and says, you got cataract. No, the guy says, Rinkin Continental. I shook my head. That's pitiful, I said. Demeaning, just for starters. And you're no Buddy Hackett with the pigeon. It's not funny. It's almost hopeless. But I'll tell you what, I bet you I can make it funnier. Oh, yeah, Ev says. I'd like to see you try. Two wives are having lunch, I said. One says, my husband thinks he's funny, but he's not. Just yesterday, he told an awful joke I didn't laugh at, so he got upset. Man, her friend says, I know what you mean. I'll prove it, says the first wife. Let me try it out on you. A man goes to his doctor, a Japanese eye doctor, and says, I no see so good. The doctor looks him over and says to the man, you got cataract? So he says, no. What's funny about that?
Yeah.
You have an amazing, I mean, I guess this is not so surprising because you've written verse plays, but you have an amazing sense of dialogue, like somehow rendering believable dialogue in a poem is not easy. To pace it, to make it sound like it came out of live humans, that is hard to do.
Well, thank you. I'm going to have something to say later on about trying to do that, and also trying to write dialogue in the context of a comedy act where you're in blank verse, but I've got a stand-up comedian speaking in blank verse. I'll get to that when the time comes. So you get the point, I hope.
Well, one of the things that interests me about this poem is, having done stand-up for many years, I'm very tuned into questions about the politics of comedy, and of course, white guys doing an Ebonics bit in their comic act really rubs a lot of people, including me, the wrong way, or making fun of stereotypical Asian accents is another thing that hack comics do, and racist audiences laugh at. My favorite dialect joke is about the white guy who asks a waiter in a Chinese restaurant, "Do you have fried rice?" And the waiter says, "Yes, we do, American flick."
Yes,
that to me is good, funny use of dialect stereotypes.
Yeah, yeah. I like that you're taking on this kind of an issue, getting people to think about what is funny, what's not really funny, or what people used to think of as funny, and as think of Breakfast at Tiffany's. People
well,
used to.
that's the Mickey Rooney as Mr. Uniyoshi is the worst stereotype racist portrayal imaginable.
Yeah, but he did not get called out on it, back in the day. And now it's so cringy.
I wonder if Chico Marx, a non-Italian comedian, could make a whole career about doing a comic Italian stage accent today, the way he did back then.
Good question.
Yeah. Well, I should say that this is quite an old poem, and the event that it describes took place 50 years ago. So there is all of that. And at the very least, the rewrite of the poem shifts the focus away from the stereotypes and onto something about how closely husbands and wives sometimes listen to each other. And I think you can still write about that. Is that fair to say?
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, the fact that in the original joke, the patient is Asian, and in her retelling of the joke, it's the doctor who's Asian, for example. Yeah, that clearly was a hint about something in the relationship.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of a first salvo in the way that I see things. And with respect to what you said, Melissa, this on the page is one thing, but you really have to hear it read out aloud and timed properly in order to make it work. And so we'll get to that later, because I learned some interesting things trying to write comedy in verse.
I bet.
Yeah. So let's go to round two.
All right. Well, one of my brothers is a doctor, and it's become kind of a family tradition to donate our bodies to the med school where he studied.
Yeah.
And this poem, which was published in Light, is to a medical student dissecting my cadaver. You're sure to see me from some angle I myself could never wangle, and I can't guess how much respect it's reasonable to expect, as all my scars and imperfections yield to your intimate inspections. In your shoes, I might deride me while I looked around inside me, eyeing the organs I abused by what I didn't use or used. So feel entitled to a joke about the flesh you slice and poke. Saving lives and easing pain are worthwhile skills you hope to gain from what my innards can reveal. If laughter aids that, no big deal. I will be too deceased to mind your quips about what you might find. So someday your manner by the bed of any patient who's not dead will feature sober empathy, but cut yourself some slack with me.
Oh, I love it. Again, finding light in the darkness. Yeah. I have to point out because, I focus on these things a lot as a teacher. Your rhymes are so good, Chris. Rhyming different parts of speech, different length words, different spellings, different derivations. It just makes it so much richer to the ear, and it just pokes the funny bone harder.
Thank you. A.E. Stallings talks a lot about sort of the next level stuff to know about rhyming. Rhyming different parts of speech is funnier than rhyming a noun with another noun and so on.
Yeah. And I think someone who first started talking about the kind of thing was the poet Dick Davis. He used to, I don't know that he's done this in a while, but he used to teach workshops on rhyme at the Westchester Poetry Conference. Yeah. Did either of you ever take it with him?
I took a workshop with him, but I want to say it wasn't only about rhyme. It's hard for me to remember. It was one of the first ones I took, so it was over 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, that's a while. But yeah, he has a lot of great thoughts on rhyme, including like, where do you put the less expected word? Do you put it first or do you put it second? And in his view, it depends on whether it's a serious poem or a funny poem.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that would have a relationship to, I would like to talk to him about that in the context of writing lyrics as a songwriter, because you run into, those are questions that I handle all the time in my songwriting, is which of the rhyme words comes first. Yeah, I'd be interested to get his more on his take.
Yeah.
I did this poem at a reading not long ago, and a woman came up to me after the show to say that she's a med student, and on the first day of class, when they met their cadavers, as the saying goes, in some cases they also got messages written by the donors, and she said they were all very solemn, somber messages, and they left her feeling a little bit introverted about handling these bodies. And she said she would have appreciated something a little bit lighter hearted. So I think I am going to send a copy of this poem to the med school, where I have signed up for the anatomical gift program, as it's called.
Oh, I love it. Oh,
that's great.
What a lucky med student that will be.
Yeah. Maybe the only one.
Inculcating exactly the opposite attitude towards the donors from what the med school wants them to have. But hey, that's not my concern.
Yeah, that could be.
On the other hand, they're going to have even more respect for you, because they're like, this dude was funny,
From your mouth to God's ear.
Nice. I like it.
Oh, that's great.
Did you choose something to follow that consciously, Melissa?
I did. I mean, again, this is a different take on mortality, but that poem of Chris's did make me think of this poem of mine, which is also, for good or for ill, the concluding poem of my book that's coming out in the fall, Satan Talks to His Therapist. It feels like a good concluding poem, as you will see. why this is the poem of mine that people will share when I die. It starts with trees and mulch. Life's circle, noted. It doesn't dwell on government or guns, so won't offend no matter how you voted. It's free of puns. Despite its morbid title, it feels breezy, unlikely to depress you in the least. It isn't sexy snark you'd be uneasy to show your priest. This poem has no news or name checks in it, no clues to decade, season, week, or date, which makes it timely if I die this minute or make you wait. It barely mentions habits of ill breeding. Its words are rarely of the vulgar sort. And if you find it crap not worth rereading, at least it's short.
Ending each stanza with a line shorter than the other lines in the stanza is perfect for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm so used to seeing that done with serious topics and in serious poems.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris is right. It's a natural for this kind of treatment. And I don't know what else is in your book, of course, but certainly this is an apt way to end it, whatever is in it.
Yeah, I mean, as you might guess, other poems in the book do things that this poem is saying it's not doing, right? So yes. It's not about government, it's not about guns, there's no sexy snark, et cetera, although actually the bulk of my sexy snark is in another book of mine, but there are certainly there's some wordplay in other poems in the book. This one doesn't really have that. So yeah, it's like, this is the safe one to share with people who hate all of that stuff, you know.
And not until after you have said its words are rarely of the vulgar sort do you drop the crap bomb in the next line. Which is a pretty mild-mannered vulgarity, let's face it.
But she has more to say elsewhere, as we know.
Yeah. Other poems have vulgarity, I guess, a little more vulgar than crap, yeah. But depending on the crowd, crap is quite bad. I had the privilege. I have a, as I think Chris, and maybe Al, I have a foot in journalism still. And a few years back, I was asked to write an article on swearing. Specifically, would my family and I take up the challenge of not swearing for a long period? And would I chronicle the results of this? And I also interviewed experts on swearing. I read books on swearing, all this kind of stuff. It was actually fascinating talking to all these folks. It was very challenging not swearing. As I said at the start of the article, if a sitcom based on my family's life were to be made, it would air on cable. At the time, my daughter rarely swore. That's shifted now that she's an adult, a young adult, but still an adult. But anyway, one of the things that was emphasized by swearing experts I interviewed was how different it is in different cultures, what words we find deeply offensive. And for example, just names of certain diseases, that is much worse than dropping an F-bomb, for example. In some countries, and it's all contextual, depending on the history of the country, beliefs that they have, really, and so on. So it was educational and scary, because it's much easier than I had even realized to deeply offend someone when you travel abroad.
Oh my!
So just dropping in that little PSA.
Interesting. You got to do your homework before you cross a border.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Sorry, I got us way off topic there. I'm sure you can steer us right, Becca.
Well, it's okay, because what I'm going to follow with is only very tenuously related to Chris's poem, which did have a student in it. This one also has students in it. I was, for 25 years, a teacher of English, music, and physics in a private school here in Rhode Island. And this was something I made up during my tenure when I was motivated. I have a much mellower attitude towards everything now, although I love the job. And I have to say, it's very rarely that I encountered a student that fit into the category of this poem. But I do want to say that such people do exist, and they are categorically different from all other students. And they are completely worthy of the scorn I heap on them in this poem. So I'm just going to say that up front. I apologize for nothing, only in their case. Everybody else I loved. And I even love them in a way. It's called The Grade Grubbers. And before I read this, I should say that this is unusual in that it's a poem that was composed in the mouth. I wrote it aloud before I ever wrote it down. So apropos of what we were just saying before about the distinction I made between comedy and the larger area of humor, everything about this depends on how the words are produced in the mouth and how the rise and fall of your voice and how you time it. So I guess that's a fair warning. The grade grubbers. I love to see them writhe and squirm and plead their puny case. I love the look of abject fear that creeps upon each face. And once I've let their spirits rise, it almost makes me shout to see that little spark of hope first flicker, then go out.
I thought you were such a nice guy. Yeah.
Naturally, I was giving you credit for this being merely a persona poem. Al never really felt that way about his students.
Hell no. Hell no.
Yeah, I was thinking of like, I don't know, you were channeling like Hilaire Belloc or, I don't know, X.J. Kennedy and the Bratz poems, something like that. Yeah, it's I could also imagine in like an Alan Rickman voice, Snape from
Yes.
Harry Potter first,
Certainly.
then go out. Anyway.
Yes. It can be delivered in a much more threatening manner. But I like to take the position of savoring the build up to the joy of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it does really happen. I mean, it really does happen that at the end of the semester, somebody comes up and is actually trying to wheedle something out of you.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a pleasure that you feel by not giving them what they want that is palpable.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's warranted.
Yeah. One thing I like about this poem is, because of the two stanza structure, you kind of expect that there will be a bit of a character arc, a bit of evolution in the poem, and it will end up with something kindly or some kind of twist. But no.
Oh, no.
Speaker is just dastardly all the way through.
Well, once again, I've got to say, those few people who caused this poem to come into existence deserve it.
Oh, yeah. I do know the kind of student you mean, although I also, I've taught for a long time as well. And I admit that between being a parent, between seeing kids cope with the COVID era, and the economy and the horror of being a young person in this age, and now hoping to make a lucrative living, like especially with the STEM kids who are going into medicine and need that impeccable GPA. I do feel sorrier for them now. It's a tough world out there. But yes, I like every teacher, isn't it nice when you encounter students who just want to learn for its own sake and not just the grade? Yeah.
Well, the I could give you on another occasion a very lengthy story of the one person that really caused that poem to come into existence. And I think you would agree that his situation was not one of understandable stress. It
Are we
was
going to get
one
the director's cut?
maybe when we're done. It was more a question of uh, uh, unsuccessful. Uh, what is the he was so unscrupulous that it was important that he not succeed. It was much there wasn't any room for empathy in this particular case. So the fact that I turned it into something funny actually was as far as I could go towards charity. Anyway, enough of that. Coming back around to Mr. O'Carroll, please.
All right. Well, as Melissa knows, love poems can also be comic poems. I have written a lot of love poems to my wife, that some serious, some much funnier. You have written a number of love poems to your husband that are funny as well as heartfelt. So this is a love poem. It's one that I would not have been able to write without the language that Lewis Carroll created when he wrote Jabberwocky. This is Nonsense Love. You gimble with my vorpal blade. I gyre in your wave. I quiffle tulgy coinages for such a frabjous babe. 'Tis brillig, and my love's unhinged in uffish consequence. My tangled tongue is burbling you with words that make no sense. Callooh, Calais, I want to say, I'm beamish that you're mine. My borough groves are mimsy, and my heart is on the line.
Woo!
Ah, that's great.
She must have just absolutely swooned.
She does like that one. She likes being in the audience when I read that one.
That's a lot of fun. That's so much fun. I love that you have turned these, innocent and or violent words of Lewis Carroll's into dirty words. That's very fun.
Well, just the idea that when we first encountered those words, they were the first time anyone had encountered those words, and we've never encountered them since. Means that that they were open to being repurposed the way that you repurpose them, and we feel like it's great because you can't take literal notes on what it means, but emotionally every step of the way exactly how the speaker feels, and that's just I think it was a great thing to do to from Carol to O'Carroll.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah.
I have never used the name Dodgson, so I can't claim that close kinship.
Well, that's fair enough. You never used the name Chuck Berry either, I assume.
Roll over, Beethoven.
I was thinking of O'Carroll.
Oh.
Do you know his song, O'Carroll?
Oh. I'm sorry. I should have got that when you first said it. I was asleep at the switch.
No, you better go back and steal something from him now.
It's never too late.
No. Well, that's just great. It just floats, and you float with it.
Fun. Yeah. So much fun. I love it.
So again, did you pick something how could you pick something to follow that, really?
Well, so I do not tend to write nonsense verse or verse that incorporates words that don't have a clear meaning in the language, but I love writing verse that plays with the sound of language and also deals with other sorts of nonsense. For example, this poem has to do with a billboard war among law firms in Rochester, New York, where I live. And there's a long history. I believe we are the epicenter of the rhyming billboard, you know.
Really?
Yeah, for law firms for some reason. Like that is just, you know, it's like hair salons have to have a punny name. Law firms have to have a rhyming jingle. And so there were, or a billboard. And so I ended up writing this poem that has to do more with sounds that are not in the poem than sounds that actually are in the poem. And I am going to attempt to sing it because jingles have to be sung. So it begins with an epigraph, which is no rhymes, just results. And this was on a law firm ad spotted on one of these billboards in response to the rhyming ads of rival law firms. So again, no rhymes, just results. Jingle for a law firm. Heard at work or in a car, call Farbar, Star, and Henderson. That's 8888888. Our legal team is truly fine. We're grads of NYU and Yale. We make our cases without snags. Until we win, you know we will. You won't receive a single charge. So hire us, you can't go wrong. Just don't forget this catchy tune.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, you're helping to make my case that this is an example of something that you can read it on the page and eventually you'll get what's going on from looking at it. That the final words, other words that rhymed, were telegraphed and then not delivered. But the way that you sing it, because of the nature of musical form, sets up our expectation on more than one level. So it's also on the musical level. And then the little catch that you did in your throat at the end of the lines underlines it further. These are things that you can't put on the page. And I frequently argue that, at least in my own work, if you read it on the page, you're not getting the full story. To me, it's like reading sheet music. You need to play it. You need to bring it alive. And then you'll hear things that you couldn't notate on the page if you were the composer, so to speak, because musical notation is much more nuanced than what we can do with language on the page. So this works great on the page, but it's just, you know, it's dimensions better in person. And thank you for singing it.
Thank you. I feel now like I should be including a little CD in the book so people can listen along to my beautiful rendition.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when I made my second book, I also recorded the entire, it's 100 poems. I recorded the entire 100 poems.
That's right. That's right.
And I put a link in the end of the book that you could follow the link so you could hear, if you read it, you could very easily hear me reading it aloud. And I don't know if anybody ever followed that link, but it's probably not even still up because Dropbox has come and gone and come again. But yeah,
that was a great idea. That was a great idea. I mean, I love it too when journals have that, when they have the audio component. And I don't mean, like, I write a lot of prose humor as well, and they will do that, you know, that robot voice, you know, so that hard of hearing people can hear it. I don't mean that, but I mean that is beneficial in a different way, although it's kind of death to humor. But I do love it when you get to hear the poet reading their work in journals like Rattle. It definitely adds a dimension that I enjoy.
When the reader is good. I mean, as a child, you know, I was listening to, I prized finding LPs of Frost reading Frost and Yeats reading Yeats. And there are a number of other people. And I really developed a strong sense that the performing side could add a tremendous amount to what I had already fallen in love with on the page in the books. It was just extra special to hear Stopping by Woods in Frost's ancient voice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I guess I should read my Alice in Wonderland based thing. It's not really based on Alice in Wonderland original version of the poem. It was just the Queen, but a sufficient number of people thought I was talking about Elizabeth. No, there's more than one queen. And so I thought, well, the easiest way to head this off is to make it the Red Queen. So thus the Red Queen as critic. And it really is, it's an attempt to say in a different way what I think is important to say about all criticism of particularly popular cultural stuff. And I'll get to that after I read it. So this is the Red Queen as critic. It's not an avocado, sniffed the Queen. Inside of it is white instead of green. Its skin is thin and far too hard to peel. Its scent could never complement a meal. So many little stones, there should be one. My list of its deficiencies is not done, but ma'am, I said, consider rather what it is, instead of everything it's not. Its glossy sheen is pleasing to the eye. When baked, it makes a most delicious pie. So many tastes with which it goes together. It's tart and sweet and pairs up well with cheddar. Its versatility is undenied. When pressed, it's metamorphosed into cider. The royal doctors all will stay away if you consume a single one each day. Discomfited, she pressed her lips together, for she would not be contradicted ever. My pleas could not decrease her curt bravado. What good is it? It's not an avocado.
And you never have to say what it is. You give enough details, enough information that everybody knows what it is. Even what it's not is mentioned twice. The actual name of the fruit is never mentioned. And
well, I hope people can figure it out. But, for the purposes of the point, it wouldn't even matter what it was.
No, I love this is a great example to me of another role Light verse gets to play, which is getting people to consider a serious point with a spoonful of sugar, which is the humor.
Exactly.
There's something that's wrong with critics, but we're going to tell it in this fun, allegorical way. Love it. Yeah. By the way, for the first two stanzas, I thought you were talking about a zucchini, and then I realized. Yeah, it's got a lot of great touches. Yeah.
Well, thanks. It's when I was first touring as a musician 50 odd years ago, the band I was in, Roomful of Blues, we played The Bottom Line, and we got panned so fiercely in the Village Voice the next day. And the substance of, I'm not going to say the name of the reviewer, although he became very famous.
Can you tell us what it rhymes with?
I don't even know. He may still be alive, so I'm going to let him slide.
Okay.
But it was very interesting because his approach to writing a review of our performance was to take each of us, because we were playing music that was from the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s and 50s and 60s, and blues music and swing music. And he compared each of us in the band unfavorably with the best person that ever played that instrument.
Oh, good grief.
So he said, Duke Robillard, the guitar player, wishes he could play like Charlie Christian. Well, yeah, of course he does. When he got to me, he said, I wished I could play like Roy Eldridge, and Roy Eldridge is one of my heroes. So in point of fact, he was literally correct. But the approach was exactly what I take issue with in this poem, which is he wasn't talking about us, about what we were. He was talking about what we weren't. And that's not ever a helpful criticism. You've got to judge things on their own, in their own terms, on their own merits. So anyway, this is quite a new poem. I wrote it last winter. So I let 50 years go by before I returned fire.
I thought of Bob Dylan. There's something happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? That's one of the most famous pop culture attacks on a clueless critic.
Yeah. Well, no one would ever be able to figure out who I might be talking about in this poem, but I guess people were able to figure out who Dylan was talking about. So that's okay.
Well, revenge is best served cold. So.
Yeah, well, this is deep freeze. Very good. So we're coming up on round 4. So you want to give us your penultimate offering there, Mr. O'Carroll?
All right, this will be great. I once saw an actor, notoriously drunk, an actor who was a notorious drunk, on a late night talk show, saying he didn't see how anybody had the nerve to play a drunk scene sober. And I thought at the time, that is the worst acting advice I have ever heard. Yes. So I just want you to know, I'm doing a poem here about 2 great American pastimes, baseball and getting high. And I know better than to get high before performing a weed poem. I can celebrate later.
I stand behind your approach.
So this is
me too.
A poem that I wrote just before, back at the end of 2019, before the pandemic, when Major League Baseball announced it was removing marijuana from its list of banned substances. So this is Toke Me Out to the Ball Game. The outlook was like brilliant for the Weedville 9 that day. They vaped some prime sativa, ergo ultra psyched to play. When Weedville got the munchies, there was never any doubt that vendors stocking Cracker Jack and peanuts would run out. They ditched the anthem for a mellow dose of Grateful Dead. The game was not a contest, but a work of art instead. The physics of the knuckleball, for once, made perfect sense, and home runs rocked the happy math of arcs above the fence. A runner with a lead off first could slide through hyperspace to wormhole past the tag and wind up safe at second base. With Bolshoi ballet grace, the infield turned its double plays, while journeyman outfielders were reborn as Willie Mays. The talent was all Golden Glove, Cy Young, and Triple Crown. So everybody got their ticket punched for Cooperstown. The mojo of the game enacted cosmic majesty as baseball truth converged and merged with baseball fantasy. The players all flew higher than a patriotic eagle in celebration of the news that cannabis was legal. That is another poem that appeared originally in Light. The previous one, Nonsense Love, appeared in Rotary Dial, but Melissa published this one in Light.
Did this one remind me, run as a poem of the week, or did it run in a regular issue?
I think it ran in a regular issue.
Okay, well, that's a good, I mean, it was inspired by a news story, right? That Major League Baseball was removing marijuana from its list of banned substances, but that has a timeless, like that story will stay fresh for a while. Some of the things we run as poems of the week, if they don't run right away, people will forget what they're referring to. But this one has legs.
When I put it in my book, I dated the epigraph. Major League Baseball announces it's taking marijuana off its list of banned substances. Reuters, 2019. Just to because I thought I needed to situate the poem in history.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Historic moment. Yeah. But this is such a great example of a news-inspired poem that doesn't just recapitulate the news. It finds a fun angle, a great, inventive format, and elevates it, makes it really fun and interesting for the reader.
And it probably presents being high as a little bit too much as if it were tripping on acid. That whole stuff about sliding through hyperspace.
Yes.
That's more an acid head image than a pothead image. But I gave myself permission to.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's okay.
It's worth asking oneself the point of view here. If when I got to the end of this, I thought, yeah, if you're a player and you're high, this is great. If you're in the stands and you're high, this is great. If you're in the stands and you're not high, what the hell is going on? So because as some of us know, there is not any significant performance enhancement effect in the real world, but it's perceived. And it can be perceived by the participants or the audience or both. Mm-hmm. But in the cold light of day, of course, there's a lot of striking out and balls not chased in the outfield and people lying down at second base. And so what I liked about it was it creates this kind of as you say, you use the word fantasy, and it's a fantasy that it doesn't stand close scrutiny if you're a narc. But if you buy the premise, buy the bit. Once you buy the premise, then the fantasy is just delicious. So,
thank you.
Yeah, I was just imagining a whole anthology of poems for narcs.
Wasn't there a Jack Webb anthology done by someone at some point?
Oh my gosh, undoubtedly.
Just the facts.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. Oh, well, would you like me to read my response to this poem? This is again not a direct response. It's a parody, and like Chris's, it's taking the existing format and bringing in something modern, some current news, and I don't think that I can't imagine there's anyone who might hear this who won't find the situation familiar. It begins with an epigraph from the Wall Street Journal, which I believe this appeared maybe late in 2020. Quote, many families are now grappling with whether, when, and how to open their pandemic quarantine bubbles to additional people.
Yeah.
So with apologies to Christopher Marlowe, here is the sheltering suburbanite to her neighbor. Come live with me inside my bubble. Our cozy and exclusive club will share real, not Zoomed or FaceTimed meals. Plus, if the ease of it appeals, we'll work around supply chain glitches by pooling all our greatest riches. My yeast can now be yours as well. My Charmin, Clorox, and Purell. And we'll take walks, no longer shouting the way we had to when each outing meant trying for a heart-to-heart while eardrums struggled yards apart. And I'll divide my sourdough starter, and you will generously barter your sewing skills. I'd love a cute new mask and tailored hazmat suit. It just makes sense that we should weather this crisis cautiously together. Now free at last to hug hello, we'll meet each day for morning Joe. We'll gossip while our kids are playing. I'll paint your nails. What's that you're saying? A nail salon? You went at 3? Stay the fuck away from me.
That's going to be very hard to explain to somebody in 20 years.
Maybe. That we'll still be all talking about all this stuff that we survived. You know, this is our generation's like big test.
Yeah.
You know,
but I mean, it's so dead
into
on.
The weeds. Just getting into the weeds of light verse techniques. I love rhyming bubble with clubble. The club, apostrophe LL. You know, that's like, you know, rhyming numerals with words, or rhyming 2 words from different languages. It's just inherently funny, and I love it.
Thank you.
It's another song lyric writers. It's in the song lyric writers bag as well.
Absolutely. Speaking of bubbles, you know, the bubble of my family intruded a bit just now while I was reading. Hopefully it didn't interfere with the acoustics on your end, Al, but let me know.
No.
Okay. Yeah, but I do think, unfortunately, these, you know, heroic stories of ours from way back when will be told still in 10, 20 years when, you know, when young folks are complaining and we're like, you don't know how hard we had it. We couldn't get toilet paper, you know.
Yeah, but the aptness of this when you reach the end, the transgression on the part of the neighbor is exactly all it would take to you know to merit that response. And so somebody that didn't live through it would have to consider the implications of that, because it's not going to be part of their experience, we hope.
We hope. Yeah. We're all sitting here thinking dire thoughts about other
I've seen this great gray ocean liner of the last 3 years slowly drifting off towards the horizon, because I find that I can remember things that happened during COVID, but I have a lot of trouble indexing them according to year or sequence. It's just one gooey blur.
Gooey blur, yeah.
So, but yeah, this is it's a great poem for bringing to very crystalline life what it was like, you know, to live through it, and how nice it is to mostly be past it.
And how, yeah.
And tipping your hat to Christopher Marlowe never hurts. Also,
it never hurts, and that's, you know, some poems get parodied so often, you know, but that one works well, you know, because it is, you know, it's got to be a famous poem, and in the U.S. there aren't too many poems people are going to recognize, unfortunately, unlike perhaps the
true.
UK.
Good point. Wow. Well, inevitably, I was going to have to make a right turn from the proceedings in order to bring in this example for your what was it Rod Serling used to say, for your examination or your amusement or for your whatever it was. But this is, I'm not going to read this excerpt. I'm going to play you an excerpt from one of my audio plays. And over the last 5 years, I've been writing audio plays in verse. And so this one is from 2021. And no, this one is from last year. This is Hill and Dale. It's from last year. And the premise of the play is that it's about a couple, a divorced couple, who now have a 21-year-old son, but they've been divorced for many, many years. But when they were young and married, they had a comedy duo act. And in the 60s, the play takes place in 1990. And so in the 60s, they had a duo act. They were on Ed Sullivan. So they're a little bit parallel to Stiller and Mira or Nichols and May, but they had their own style. And eventually they broke up. And the husband went on as a stand-up and had a solo career. And so I had the opportunity to write scenes, comedy scenes for a duo and also for a stand-up. But the play is in verse. And so I really didn't know how having to keep to the meter would influence the way that I could write in what are really pretty familiar formats. At least the stand-up format is, everybody has heard a lot of different stand-up comedians. And so they understand that there's a broad range of how you can go about it. And I didn't really know what was going to happen. But what I learned when I wrote this was that there were certain styles that IP did not lend itself to. An example would be the Henny Youngman, Rodney Dangerfield, bang, 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 throwing out punchlines one after another, rapid fire. The meter forced me more in the direction of the monologist. So in the 60s, there were lots of comedians that told stories that were funny stories. Myron Cohen's a good example. And what I found was that the pace that a monologist would use was steady enough much of the time that you could build up to punchlines and still stay within the meter. So what I do when I write verse plays is I try my best not to give away that it's in verse. So I'm trying to go back to what you were saying, Melissa, earlier on. The dialogue, I try very hard to make sound like people talking. They happen to be talking in verse, but you wouldn't know it. And in fact, when I did my first play of this kind, the two actors that were doing the bulk of the play along with me, we rehearsed, we went in and recorded the play. And when it was done, I said to them, "So you realize that play was in verse?" And they said, "What?" They had not noticed. And they said, "Well, why didn't you tell us?" And I said, "Well, because we only had 4 rehearsals. If we had 6 weeks worth of rehearsals, I could have put it into your head and we could have worked to get it back out of your head and have you delivering your lines naturally. But the quickest way to have you deliver them as if you didn't know was to not tell you."
Wow.
I've done 3-4 more plays with 3 more with another one that we're going to do this summer with the same people. And now, of course, they know. So we have to spend time kind of digesting the fact. So the other thing that made this, this is just part of the stand-up routine. The other thing that made it interesting for me as the producer and the director was that this is supposed to be a videotape of a performance given in 1968 in front of a live audience. And so I had to put in laughs and I had to age the sound. And so that was very interesting. Again, talking about comedy in performative terms, as opposed to just what it looks like on the page. The fineness of the timing was extraordinarily fine. And Chris, since you've done stand-up, you'll know if you wait a hair too long, you lose it. you know, the thread is the tension of the thread between you and the audience and their expectation. It can deflate rapidly, to mix a metaphor. So the way I'm gonna do this is to share my screen. And we're gonna pick this up in full flight. This is not me, this is my friend Tony Leoci, who, as you'll see, is a natural at this kind of delivery.
And then, you know, you gotta have a house. You gotta be a good provider. So you work, you save, you buy a little house. But is that good enough? Oh, no. As soon as you move in, she starts on home improvement. She says, our house is too small. There's no room for us to ask a friend to spend the night. Why don't you build a guest house in the back? Just make it big enough for one. I say, that sounds more like a doghouse. She says, right, that's perfect. That's no way to treat a guest, I say. It's not for them, she says. It's so you'll have a place to sleep when I have guests. Folks, I tell you, nothing you can do will keep her happy. When you got it good, somebody else has always got it better. We went by a house one day, 3 stories, lots of rooms. She takes a look and says, I wish that we had one of those. Just then a guy with bulging muscles, wearing shorts so tight you know he's not a Jew, comes out with a ladder, leans it up against the wall, climbs up to the 2nd floor. She says, I wish you had one of those. You mean a ladder, I say? She says, no. So by and by the guy comes down again. He picks up 2 paint cans and balancing them, starts back up the ladder, very slow. She says, I wish you had 2 of those. You mean the paint cans, I say. She says, no. The cop pulls up in the driveway and a woman gets out. The guy comes down the ladder, kisses her, and brings her groceries inside. She says, I wish I had one of those. But you got me. And she says, who are you?
Since you read it, you know that it is legitimately quite strict in terms of the meter. But I would venture to say that the way that he delivers it redirects your hearing, so you're not aware of that.
Yeah, he's not emphasizing line breaks, for example. And which you know, like, tends to work reasonably well, I think, with blank verse. You know, it's not like you're not trying to milk humor from rhyme, because there isn't rhyme, you know.
Right. Yeah, it was a very interesting exercise, because because you're not permitted to write the way you want to write.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a you know, a fun build of punchlines. I'm curious now about the context of, you know, in which this story takes place. You know, what's before and after it.
It's a domestic drama. It's not a funny play. It's about the estrangement between the husband, the wife, and the son, and their gradual rapprochement by the end of the play.
Yeah, so this is sort of like a comic relief monologue kind of thing.
Well, it's part of it. It drives the plot, because at the beginning of the play, the son is helping the mother move. The son has grown up with the mother. He's rarely seen the father, and he's very disappointed with him. And as he's helping his mother move, he carries these boxes down from the eaves, and they're boxes of videotapes, and they're marked Hill and Dale, Ed Sullivan Show, 1968. And the son was born after the parents had split up. he's never, and of course in 1990, you couldn't go to YouTube and see old clips.
Mm-hmm.
He's never seen his parents act. So when he sees these tapes, he says, wow, what are you doing with these? She says, oh, I'm throwing them out. He says, well, do you mind if I take them? I've never heard your act. And she said, well, all right, if you insist. But so it's important for him to get a sense of who they were before, when they were together, and then when he was born, and then what his father had to do after they broke up. And I don't want to give the plot away, but they start out as far apart as they could possibly be. Well, the son and the mother get along, but then gradually they come together. And so the comic scenes are needed for characterization, but they also form a kind of a comic relief, except it's not, it's just something humorous in the life of the characters. The play itself is not funny.
Mm-hmm. No, interesting.
So, but it actually, this play and the other one that I did the previous year just won awards at the National Audio Theater Festival, and they'll be up all summer. I have them up in my YouTube channel, but they'll be up all summer because they won gold and platinum awards.
That is so fantastic.
It's nice because I did not even tell them that it was in verse. Because they don't
just
care.
snuck it in there. I love it.
Yeah.
Stealth poetry.
I wonder if Shakespeare told his actors.
Well, that's just how they spoke back then,
yeah.
you know.
Well, it's an interesting question because in another week and a half, and I should say, by the way, first of all, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to Poetry by the Sea. I know you were there, Melissa.
And Chris was there as well for part of it, and it was a lot of fun. As always, you should come next time.
Well,
Perfect conference.
The reason I didn't make it is that I'm going to be at Westchester, and I'm actually running a workshop in verse drama.
Excellent.
So I'm going to be able to use these clips and talk about things and some of the same things that we've been covering here. So anyway, I just thought it would be a curiosity for you to hear something that disguises its metric nature in a familiar context.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing it. Yeah.
Neat.
I enjoyed reading it. I'm sorry I didn't get to hear the voice.
Yeah.
Now that I know that there's an opportunity to do that, I can.
Yeah, there's one of the files that I'll share it is the audio file of the same piece.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, let's go to the last round.
All right then. At the very beginning, I opened with a poem in praise of old age and dementia. It's a common light verse tactic to write in praise of something that you don't really like. And the flip side of that is to write a poem condemning something that you do really like. So I wrote this poem for an anti-poetry contest. They wanted poems denouncing poetry and poets. And I was a little surprised how much fun it was to write this. This is verses against verses, or if you prefer, verses.
Yes.
Every I am, every trochee, every anapestic joke he tries to tell is more annoying than the last one. With each spondee, with each dactyl, she seems flaky as a fractal. Are they stoned or drunk or trying to pull a fast one? When their measures wax erotic, they look weirdly unexotic. All those rhymes and rhythms they keep having fun with may be just benignly strange or may pose some grave moral danger. So beware the foolish straw their gold is spun with. Some are beat and some romantic. All their egos are gigantic. Keep your distance when they try to draw you close. Their metaphors are snares that will catch you unawares, and their similes are like a fatal dose. Some are living, some are dead, some are Sylvia and Ted, and you wouldn't want to drink with them or date them. The way they play with words like a chef with dead, plucked birds makes you wonder why God bothered to create them.
Sylvia and Ted is just classic.
I love that line. So many great lines, though, and the interior rhyme that you deploy so adroitly throughout. So much fun, so musical, so Broadway. It's very fun. Yeah, and of course, I love the irony that this versus is also actually an ad for the power of metrical verse. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You got it all.
Great title.
I wonder what the given the splinter of people nowadays who write and or value form in verse. I mean, the free versers outnumber the rest of us by a very, very wide margin. They're not really the audience that you're speaking to per se, Chris, right? It's kind of, this presumes that people have been exposed to formal verse and don't care for it.
Well, I suppose, I expect that some people might have to look up the words, trochee, anapest, and dactyl, spondy.
Some people.
Really, iambic pentameter is the only thing we knew was going to be on the final exam, so that's all we remembered from English class, right? The other metrical feet are mysterious to many people. But I although it was fun finding rhymes for trochee and dactyl and so on, I don't think that people not being familiar with some of the details of rhymed and metrical verse would detract from having fun with that poem. I don't think
so either. And whether they continue to read poetry or write poetry or not, a lot of college and high school kids are going to be exposed to those words at some point still. Thanks to diehards like us. But I think you're right, Chris. Even if people don't know those words, it does not detract from enjoying that delightful gallop through the poem. Yeah.
People have heard of the beats and the romantics, even if they couldn't name you a dozen of each and so on.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. I guess the question is, how do you reach that audience? Isn't it much? Well, the one that for whom these are not familiar terms that we all use all the time. The ones that don't remember anything but maybe iambic pentameter from high school. Where do you put this? Where would it be seen by the great group of people that would still be able to appreciate it? I'm not an editor. Melissa, what kind of where would this go?
We would run a poem like this in Light. Did we run this poem in Light?
This did appear in Light. This did appear in Light.
So, I mean, yes, to some extent, this is inside baseball, right? It's poetry about poetry, which is actually a genre that I would say we could receive less of and still be happy as editors, because it doesn't always make, it's not always as much fun as this one. And it does tend to be a bit navel-gazing in a lot of cases. But sometimes you get one like this, which is just a hell of a lot of fun. And you're like, okay, well, we are still open to reading poems on poems, because you might get a poem like this one, And
I have to admit, I did tell a lie earlier. This did not appear in Light.
It did not appear in Light.
This appeared in the Spectator.
Okay.
The British magazine, The Spectator.
We don't run stuff that's already been online. That's true. Right. I guess I've seen it before then, maybe in one of your collections. Is that correct?
It is in one of my books, yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe I saw it in The Spectator, although I don't always see The Spectator. It's great when you mention that you're in The Spectator so I can catch it.
I should be better at self-promotion. I try to let my friends
Yeah.
know when I have stuff.
Yeah. Well, here's a little commercial for the Spectator. They run, it's weekly still, right? A weekly competition for comic verse. I used to enter it now and again. It's a lot of fun. Chris is a perennial winner of this thing. You know, the judge will pick like half a dozen usually and run them, and everybody gets a few quid. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a news and opinion magazine comparable to Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, so on.
Wow.
But because it's British, it has a light verse and comic prose contest in the back of the issue every week.
Imagine.
Yeah, and it's, you know, even if you don't feel like entering, it's, you know, you'll always find some fun stuff. Chris is in there a lot, and there are a few other, you know, frequent offenders. Basile Ransom Davies, he's in there all the time. But, you know, there are a lot of, Chris is not the only American, although I believe May Scanlon was the first American to crack that one.
Yeah, she was formidable. I liked seeing her stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, the late great May Scanlon. Yeah.
Wow. You feel like making your final stand?
Sure. And this is, again, not only as an editor, but as a writer, I generally shy away from poems about poems, but now and again, there's an opportunity I can't resist. And one came about when I was asked to judge the Frost Farm poetry competition a few years ago. So this poem begins with an epigraph that was something that my friend Wendy, who was also my hairstylist at the time, said to me when I told her about this competition. And she said, you know, I mentioned the Frost Farm contest, and she said, so is it like the Westminster Kennel Club, but with poems?
Yeah.
So here is Best in Show. Here are the poems that, and I will mention there are a few somewhat cheesy puns strewn throughout. See if you can identify them. Okay. Here are the poems that wag a great tail, that ripple with muscular verbs. The light ones, the dark ones, the bound through the park ones, the ones that go sniffing at curbs. Here is the sonnet with well-bred allusions, the triolet ready to beg with its soft, friendly paws and manicured claws, the limerick humping your leg. Oh, how you long to give treats to them all, even the poems that bite or force you to look as they lick their own tuchus to keep them from howling all night. But of course, only one gets to fetch the big trophy. So you comb and you vet till you know, in a month and an age, that a lone dog-eared page has jumped in your lap and won't go. And I should add that I dedicated this poem to the late and wonderful Susan DeSola, who won that competition with her poem Buddy, which is a long narrative poem. And I went to the Frost Farm that summer, and got to hear her read the poem in person, and it was wonderful.
And I've told you already that I love the line, the limerick humping your leg. I can relate to being that kind of poet, I also I love the way that your irreverence and jokiness about all the different breeds of dogs all the way through the poem kind of sets you up and gives you permission for that wonderful, sentimental, cuddly, this is the one that has to hop in my lap and I can't ever let go.
Yes,
because it's
this is the one I'm going to adopt. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I should have mentioned, too late, I should have said it before the poem, but of course the ones that, are puns, homophones or whatever, like the word tail is T-A-L-E in the poem, but, it's supposed to make you, hear
And
the other
manicured
two.
claws, CLAUSE on the.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. See, this is a case where hearing it, you miss some stuff that's on the page.
Yes.
There's no great solution for that except to remember to say the right things before you read the poem, which I forgot to do. Yeah, it's I find and I think I may have talked about this a little bit on the Frost Farm, actually, because I was talking about in my keynote address that summer the importance of constraints in creativity. Not an original thought with me, but I've studied that and definitely feel that it applies well to comic poetry. And like the great Rina Espaillat, the tighter the box, the smaller the box you put me in, the happier I am. And I feel like in the case of this poem, when I'm essentially saying something laudatory, something positive about poetry, having those tighter constraints of meter and rhyme, and actually a fairly challenging format for meter and rhyme forced me to more original thoughts and less maudlin thoughts. No one wants to hear a poet go on about, oh, poetry is such a comfort, that kind of thing. So it helped me to do it in a way that I hoped would be entertaining. Yeah.
It can also be seen, just to stay on the technical side for a moment. It's almost a textbook example of one way to extend a metaphor. Mm-hmm. That essentially you're extending the metaphor on one level, because you can go in any direction to any dog, any mm-hmm. kind of dog, mm-hmm. and it's and there are many. You extend it in many different directions, which is refreshing, because normally I don't see metaphor extended this far, and certainly not in the way, in an ironic, light and yet serious way. So it's, it would be, you could teach people about extended metaphor by using this, which would be maybe unexpected.
Well, it's you get lucky sometimes. Like, this was a metaphor that really, to me, fit the material, and the more I thought about it, the more parallels I was finding. Yeah. Between poetry and dogs, which on the surface one might not necessarily see.
Yeah. Well, then you've got the other dimension of it, is that it's not merely dogs, but dogs in the context of a show where they're mm-hmm. judged.
Yeah.
And yeah. Because it's unusually rich, I think. That's another thing that I like about it. And then, of course, it's great to have a superstructure that lends itself really well to your to what it is you're trying to say. But then you still have to do it. You still have to write it. You still got to find the dogs.
Yeah.
You got to say something about each of the dogs, and so it's really. It's like you hit all the targets on this. It's very nice to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's also something, I love to see something done in a way that I not only never thought of, but probably would never have thought of.
Well, that's because you didn't have Wendy for your hairdresser.
It's also because I didn't grow up with dogs, because I'm really allergic to dogs.
Oh, gosh. I didn't grow up with dogs either. Yeah, I always wanted them. The only pet I got growing up was sea monkeys.
Forgive me for laughing. I'm sure you had names for them, but
no, they didn't last long enough to get names. I think they lived a matter of hours. They're really just brine shrimp, but they're so tiny. You can imagine all these attributes for them. The package they were in, had these. These cartoon images of what you were really raising in your tank, and
yes.
this was the 70s, so the male sea monkeys were they had a pipe, and they were hanging out, and the female sea monkeys had long curling eyelashes and lipstick.
I remember the ads.
To do. Yeah. So I thought this was what I was getting, and in fact they were either photophobic, or phototropic. They either move toward or away from the light. That's all I remember of them. And that was all I was able to discover before they all dropped dead, probably due to something wrong with the water I had put them in. Tragic.
Wow. Well, there's a blast from the past. At this juncture, all I have remaining is my attempt to rewrite Cole Porter for a more modern audience. And when I teach my course, sometimes it's a workshop, sometimes it's a course on lyric writing, song lyric writing. When I first conceived of it, I actually wrote it for poets, because I thought that people who are already used to working in with meter and rhyme had an instinctive feel for what you have to do when you're adding melody to the words, and you understand that instinctively that some words lend themselves to a rising of a melody and others to a falling. And I always thought that was the way that I got into it. I got into songwriting, the music part, from the words. I wrote lyrics before I wrote music. I had a collaborator who wrote music back in college. And so it was, so I learned in stages, which was probably good for me. But at any rate, Cole Porter, God knows, can't be improved upon. So I immediately decided I had to try. If you already know you can't do it, you have permission. So let's see. I'm going to sing it with the verse. Not very many people sing the verse. I gotta get my B flat again. Once the song hits of old, with a lyric writ by Cole, led the way, hey, hey. But it seems these days that a clever turn of phrase is passé, hey, hey. Yet we're still writing songs to help lovers get along. And the French still make sense when they say that the more things change, then the more that they remain the same. That's why the left do it, the right do it. Independents say they might do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Virgins and cads who follow fads do it. Daughters who would never tell their dads do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Young brides and grooms in rented rooms do it without making a sound. Pharaohs in tombs do it. It's more fun underground. Gamblers who wait and trust to fate do it. Others in the middle of a date do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Wives on a whim to stay trim do it. Husbands just carping their DM do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Some chaps who nap half the day do it. Cougars who get captured by their prey do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. The rich and poor, to be sure, do it. So they're going to hell. A few who stay pure do it, although not very well. Some blokes who blow didgeridoos do it. Them that makes a show of their tattoos do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Girls who lack means but have ends do it. Boys who learned about it from their friends do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. Some on a hunch instead of lunch do it. Overripe bananas by the bunch. Do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love to make a buck. Those with pluck do it while the cameras roll. Some take like a duck to it, others not on the whole. On picky teens and mixed greens do it. Even some betwixt and in betweens do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love.
Very nicely delivered.
That's a long lyric. Damn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, a wealth of that internal rhyme.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say before I started that because Melissa was commenting on your use of internal rhyme in your last poem, Chris, that that's also a big song lyricists in the bag for song lyricists. And I really like using internal rhymes in my own songs, even though my own songs are from a tradition that doesn't lend itself, because we tend to write shorter lines in blues and soul and gospel roots kind of music. But when I'm writing in the Great American Songbook tradition like this, it's just tailor made for it. And if you're going to write like Cole, you've got to use internal rhymes, and you've got to use carpeing their DM. You know, you've got to break open familiar phrases, and it was a lot of fun to write. I've never performed it. This is the only time I've ever sung it.
Wow.
Right.
Honored to be at the premiere.
We're here at a world premiere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's
very special. Very special.
Well,
yeah, there's
it's
some great rhymes.
It's the world's
here.
swan song too. I'm sure I'll never do it again. But
no. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's some very fun lines, some great rhymes. I don't think I've seen didgeridoos rhymed with tattoos before. May never see it.
Yeah. It's of course Cole didn't live long enough to see the modern day, but I had to I had to imagine what aspects of modern life he could certainly not have avoided writing about cougars.
No,
he would have been all over that.
Yeah. I like, bringing in the politics right off the bat too, in our divided age.
Left do it, right do it. Independents say they might do it.
Yeah. That's very strong opening. Love it.
I wanted to get it out of the way too, because it's not basically political at all.
No. Yeah.
Although those last lines, betwixt and between, Stuart, you won't be able to perform it in Florida if you keep
exactly. I was thinking that, and certainly not in drag.
I'll tell you a secret. I wrote this lyric maybe 20 years ago, and as I said, I've never sung it aloud. And when I got to that line, I thought, wouldn't have written that line if I were writing it today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but the audience for this particular kind of work is A, small, B, inherently forgiving because of what you're even trying to do, So I'm sure I could get away with it, but yeah, times have changed. I don't know what I would write if I were writing it today, but most of the rest of these still work, Well, anyway, this is, we've had quite a lot of different levels of performance in this particular episode of the show. So very nice.
Listen, I just want to say, Al, there's a couple of lines from one of your poems that says, we take a deeper draft of satisfaction when others sit with us around the fire. I just want to say it's been it's been a real treat sitting around the fire in this company.
Well, thank you. That was the idea behind the show that is now concluding. We're really into the third season, but because I have a lot of double episodes, we're 3 years past the beginning, but we're just ending the second dozen of shows per se. But the reason I invented it in the first place was that it was COVID time and we didn't have conferences to go to.
Right.
So it's very nice to be able, it was particularly nice to be able to do that during COVID. And then I began to see the virtues of it because I was able to get Susan DeSola on the show in the first year, not long before she passed. And she, of course, was in the Netherlands, you know. I wouldn't have been able to, and I've had 2 shows with Dave Mason and his wife, and they're in Tasmania.
Right.
I've had
and
Alicia
Stallings.
I've had her twice from Athens. So Zoom giveth some of what COVID tooketh away.
Yeah. And just, even if COVID is not a huge factor, it's absolutely lovely to have these to go back to and replay, because of course you always put them up as videos that people can, you know, watch, even if they don't make it when you are originally airing. You know, they can watch them at their leisure, which is lovely.
Yeah, it's not a convenient night and time for a lot of people, so I did want to archive them. That's important. Great. And there's enough of an element of shop talk, poets talking to poets, that I think there's some value there for people that are maybe trying to learn about the craft. And then for people that just wonder what poets are like.
Yeah, you know, sorry for the disappointment. Yeah.
Well, no, I think
come here, Melissa, talk about her sea monkeys.
That's, to me, that's among the best stuff. To see that people that are doing this thing that most people would never consider doing and don't even necessarily think about following or making it a part of their lives. If you ask them, well, what do poets think about? What do they talk about when they get together? What these shows show over and over and over again is we're craftspeople and we're people, and we talk like both. And I don't think people that see you in a reading where you get up at a lectern and say a few words and then speak directly to an audience gets to see what it's like when we're talking among ourselves and the audience simply gets a chance to eavesdrop and look in. That's the purpose of it. So your sea monkeys are one of the high points.
Why thank you. Well, it's only because you create such a relaxed space that I felt empowered to bring up, you know, my sea monkeys. I don't tell just anyone about them.
That's great. Well, now you potentially told just about anyone.
I know.
So I hope you can live with yourself.
I know. I expect at some point I'm going to open my mailbox and some friend who sees this will have shipped me a new box of sea monkeys so I can try again. Yeah, please don't do that. I guess they still exist. Yeah.
This is, they must, although the ads I hope are different and hopefully improved. Well, I'm gonna conclude the revels, but this has been as much fun as I expected it would be, and I'm particularly happy that you guys didn't have to be introduced. You ran with the ball from the outset, and also that I had a chance to bring in some things that, strictly speaking, are not. This poem is not like the others.
Well, it's been so much fun reading with you both, and I thank you so much, Al, for having me back on. It's really a good time.
Well, this one was right up your collective alleys, doing a show on humor. So I had to have you, and I was not wrong.
You were not. This
So,
was great fun.
All right. Well, so gonna say farewell, but hopefully we'll meet in person at some point. But in the meantime, this is, you know, it's not a steak, but it's a picture of a steak. And you can chew on it if you're not particularly choosy. All right. Till next time.
Thank you, Al. Thank you,
Yeah,
Melissa.
thank you, Chris.
Farewell.